Claire Montrose thought she had found the perfect escape in the arms of Hassan al-Zafir, a 70-year-old Dubai oil magnate, but their whirlwind affair ended not in romance, but in betrayal aboard his private jet, where love, greed, and death collided. Claire Montrose had always been drawn to the idea of escape. At 29, she felt suffocated by her monotonous life in America. A dead-end job, fleeting relationships, and the constant reminder that she hadn't achieved what her peers had all weighed heavily on her. When she booked a spontaneous trip to Dubai, it wasn't just to see a new city, it was to reinvent herself. She told herself she wanted adventure, but what she really wanted was transformation, a chance to step into a world she had only ever seen through glossy magazines and carefully curated social media posts. The moment she landed, she was captivated by the gleaming skyscrapers, the endless luxury, and the unshakable feeling that this city was designed for reinvention. Her stay at a 5-star hotel in the heart of Dubai was her first taste of the life she had longed for. Marble floors, chandeliers glittering like diamonds, and the intoxicating scent of wealth filled her every moment. It was in the hotel's exclusive lounge that she first saw him. Hassan al-Zafir, a man whose presence commanded the attention of the entire room, even without effort. At 70, he was not the kind of man Claire would have expected to notice her. His face carried the lines of age, but it also carried authority, experience, and a silent promise of power. He was an oil magnate, and although she didn't know the full extent of his wealth, she quickly understood that his influence stretched far beyond Dubai. Their first interaction was brief, yet unforgettable. Hassan's eyes lingered on her longer than most, his gaze carrying an intensity she couldn't ignore. He was surrounded by advisors and business associates, yet she felt as though his attention was fixed only on her. Within days, an invitation arrived, an exclusive dinner at a private resort reserved only for the elite. Claire hesitated for a moment, but curiosity and the thrill of possibility won. She dressed carefully that evening, stepping into the role she believed the city demanded of her, glamorous, confident, and unafraid. The dinner unfolded like a dream. Hassan's wealth was displayed not with gaudy excess, but with deliberate, careful precision. Rare wines, dishes crafted by renowned chefs, and music performed by a private ensemble filled the evening. Yet it wasn't the luxury that captured Claire, it was the way Hassan treated her, not as a passing guest, but as if she had been destined to sit across from him. He listened, asked questions, and revealed only fragments of himself, enough to deepen her intrigue. She couldn't deny the allure. Here was a man who had lived many lives, accumulated fortunes, and seen the world in ways she could only imagine. Their affair began quietly, almost cautiously. Hassan, despite his age, was vigorous in spirit. He brought her into private villas, secluded beachside estates, and quiet corners of his empire that few ever witnessed. For Claire, it felt intoxicating, as if she had stumbled into a fantasy carved from the pages of a novel. She was swept up in the whirlwind of exotic cars, endless views of the sea, and the feeling of being chosen by a man who held an empire in his hands. She found herself slipping further from the person she had been in America, losing herself in the glitter of Hassan's world. Yet beneath the surface, shadows lingered. Whispers followed Hassan wherever he went. Staff members exchanged guarded glances when Claire entered a room. Conversations hushed when she appeared. It was said that Hassan was a man of unpredictable moods, that his generosity could quickly turn to fury, and that his past was littered with affairs that ended abruptly, sometimes mysteriously. Fareed Karim, Hassan's longtime assistant, always watched her closely. His eyes carried suspicion, as if he knew something she didn't. And then there was Laila Kasari, Hassan's daughter, whose absence was almost as loud as her presence. Stories suggested she despised her father's companions, seeing them only as intruders into the family's legacy. Claire ignored the unease at first. She told herself that every powerful man came with enemies, that suspicion was only natural in a world built on wealth and control. Still, the longer she stayed in Hassan's orbit, the more she felt the weight of unseen eyes. Sometimes she caught her reflection in the polished glass of a skyscraper, and barely recognized herself. The young tourist had disappeared, replaced by a woman intoxicated with power and privilege. Her nights were filled with silk sheets and whispered promises of journeys across the world. Her days were spent by pools that shimmered under the desert sun, surrounded by silent staff who never questioned her presence, but never welcomed her either. She thought she had found exactly what she was searching for: escape, transformation, and the intoxicating thrill of danger, wrapped in wealth. What she didn't yet know was that her story with Hassan al-Zafir would not end like a dream. It would unravel into something far darker, something she could not have imagined when she first stepped into that glittering hotel lounge. As the days in Dubai turned into weeks, Claire's attachment to Hassan seemed to grow deeper, but beneath her poised exterior, her thoughts were consumed with calculation. What had started as fascination with his wealth and power had become a fixation on how far she could go inside his world. She began to study the people around him, noticing details that others might have dismissed. She asked subtle questions about his travel patterns, his favorite destinations, and even his banking arrangements, framing them as innocent curiosity. To Hassan, these questions appeared playful, signs of a woman eager to know him more intimately. To those around him, particularly Farid Karim, they were red flags. Farid had served Hassan for decades. He had seen women come and go. Some clung desperately to Hassan for the luxuries he provided. Others left as quickly as they had arrived, frightened by his temper or wearied by his dominance. But Claire was different. Her charm was effortless, her manner too polished for a mere tourist who stumbled into fortune. Farid began to keep quiet notes of her behavior, the way she always lingered near Hassan's private study, the times she asked questions about his security staff, even her interest in the schedule of his private jet. He sensed intention behind her curiosity, though he had no proof to confront her. Laila Kasari, Hassan's only daughter, remained in the shadows during this time, though her disapproval was unmistakable. She rarely appeared in person, preferring to send sharp messages through intermediaries. Laila had long suffered under the shadow of her father's dominance, and their relationship was fractured, built on years of mistrust. Yet for all her bitterness, she still guarded the empire's edges with fierce vigilance. When news of Claire's presence reached her, her anger flared. She believed her father was being manipulated, humiliated even, by a woman young enough to be his granddaughter. Behind her resentment, however, was more than jealousy. Laila had her own stake in the family fortune, investments and properties that would one day be her. Claire's sudden closeness to Hassan threatened not only her father's dignity but also her inheritance. If Hassan were swayed by Claire, if he decided to amend his will or shift control of certain accounts, Laila's future would be destabilized. Her mistrust turned into obsession, and soon she began quietly pulling strings to uncover who Claire truly was. Claire, meanwhile, seemed intoxicated by the life she was building. Her social media reflected fragments of her new existence: a glass of champagne by a private pool, a designer handbag casually placed on a marble table, the shimmer of city lights from a balcony view. She never mentioned Hassan directly, keeping him invisible in her curated image, but the signs were there for anyone who knew what to look for. Each post drew envy from friends back in America, but to Claire they were proof of how far she had come, how successfully she had stepped into a different world. Hassan, too, appeared entranced. For all his reputation as a man hardened by age and wealth, he seemed softened in her presence. He showered her with gifts, invited her into private meetings, and introduced her to his associates. Some warned him quietly of the dangers of mixing romance with trust, but Hassan dismissed their concerns. He believed he was in control, that Claire's affection was genuine. Perhaps age had made him vulnerable, or perhaps he relished the idea of defying judgment by flaunting his relationship with a much younger woman. But cracks began to show in the glittering facade. Hassan's moods shifted abruptly, and he began questioning Claire's loyalty. Rumors reached him of her secretive phone calls, of her long hours spent on her laptop when she thought no one was watching. Farid fueled his suspicions by gently feeding him observations, though never outright accusations. The seeds of doubt were planted, and once they took root, Hassan could not let them go. Still, Claire pressed forward with her questions, testing how much she could learn without revealing her intent. The more she uncovered, the bolder she became. She had gained access to places few outsiders ever entered, glimpses of safes, account ledgers and encrypted files that confirmed what she had suspected. Hassan's empire stretched beyond oil, into offshore accounts and investments scattered across continents. Lila's efforts to investigate Claire soon produced results. Through discreet inquiries, she discovered that Claire's past in America was not as clean as it appeared. There were connections to individuals with histories of fraud, whispers of schemes that targeted wealthy men. It was never enough to prove outright guilt, but it painted a picture of a woman far more cunning than the innocent tourist she pretended to be. By now, the tension surrounding Claire was undeniable. Fareed watched her with suspicion, Lila tracked her with growing hostility, and Hassan began to waver between trust and paranoia. Yet Claire seemed undeterred, convinced she could manipulate the situation in her favor. What she didn't realize was that the world she had stepped into was one where mistakes were rarely forgiven, and the closer she got to Hassan's fortune, the closer she edged toward the dangerous secrets he was determined to keep buried. The invitation to join Hassan on his private jet came at a time when Claire believed she had fully secured her place in his life. It was framed as a grand gesture, an opportunity to experience the kind of luxury reserved for the few who operated in Hassan's world. The destination was Europe, though the allure was less about where they were going and more about how they would get there. Hassan spoke of champagne at 30,000 feet, of uninterrupted privacy above the clouds, of a journey that would set their bond apart from anything ordinary. To Claire, it sounded like another door opening into the deeper chambers of his empire. What she didn't know was that Hassan had other motives. For weeks, his doubts had been gnawing at him. Fareed's quiet warnings, his own unease at her constant curiosity, and the whispers he had begun to pick up from his network, all painted a troubling picture. He didn't want to lose face by accusing Claire outright, but he needed to know where her loyalty lay. A journey on the jet was the perfect opportunity, isolated, controlled, far from prying eyes. He instructed his pilot to make an unscheduled stop at a remote desert airstrip, under the guise of refueling. It was not a typical route, but Hassan's wealth and influence made such diversions seem ordinary. Fareed was unsettled from the moment he learned of the plan. His instincts told him that something was unraveling, something far more dangerous than Hassan let on. He considered warning Claire, but his loyalty was to Hassan, and his suspicion of her motives was stronger than his concern for her safety. Instead, he reached out to Lila, hoping she might intervene. He believed she could persuade her father to abandon the trip, or at least confront him with the risks. But Lila dismissed the idea. To her, the private jet was just another stage for her father's endless games of power and ego. She assumed he wanted to test Claire's devotion, or flaunt his wealth, and she wanted no part in it. As the day of departure arrived, Claire felt both nervous and exhilarated. She dressed carefully, every detail meant to project the image of a woman who belonged in this world. The private jet gleamed under the desert sun, a symbol of untouchable privilege. The crew greeted them with polished smiles, though their eyes revealed nothing. To Claire, it was intoxicating, a leap into the kind of life she had dreamed of, where travel was effortless, and boundaries did not exist. Once in the air, the atmosphere was unlike anything she had experienced before. The cabin was lined with cream leather, accented by gold and dark wood. Bottles of the rarest champagne were ready at a moment's notice, and dishes from the finest chefs waited to be served. Hassan seemed calm, even affectionate, but there was a sharpness to his demeanor that she had never noticed before. He watched her with a quiet intensity, his questions more pointed, his laughter less frequent. Claire tried to maintain her composure. She reminded herself that her role required confidence, not hesitation. She poured herself into the part of the loving companion, but somewhere in the back of her mind, a flicker of unease stirred. Why had Hassan insisted they travel alone, without the usual entourage of business partners and advisors? Why had Fareed looked so unsettled the last time she saw him? The flight continued smoothly until the pilot announced a brief stop for refueling at a desert airstrip. Hassan explained it casually, but Claire felt a ripple of suspicion. It seemed unnecessary, yet she forced a smile and pretended not to care. As the jet descended toward the isolated strip, the barren landscape stretched endlessly below, the silence of the desert unsettling against the hum of the engines. On the ground, Hassan stepped out briefly with two security men, speaking in hushed tones away from Claire's hearing. She watched through the window, her pulse quickening. It was then that she realized she was no longer in control of the game. Hassan was orchestrating something she couldn't yet define. When they reboarded and the jet lifted again into the night sky, the atmosphere shifted further. Hassan poured drinks, his hand steady, his gaze fixed firmly on her. The questions began, sharp, deliberate, and unlike anything she had faced from him before. He asked about her past, her contacts in America, her intentions for the future. Each inquiry was laced with an accusation he did not voice directly. The cabin, luxurious as it was, suddenly felt like a trap suspended in the air, far from any escape. Claire realized then that the private jet was not just a symbol of his devotion. It was his stage, his battleground, a place where he could corner her without interference. What she did not yet know was that the choices she made in that cabin would determine whether she remained the dazzling companion he had paraded through Dubai, or became the centerpiece of a far darker story, destined to crash into headlines around the world. The jet glided smoothly above the clouds, its cabin cloaked in an artificial calm that belied the tension building inside. Hassan sat across from Claire, his movements deliberate, his eyes sharp and unyielding. For weeks, doubts had gnawed at him, but now within the privacy of his airborne sanctuary, he was ready to act. He began to press her with questions, each one sharper than the last, each one peeling away at the image she had constructed. Why had she made so many calls to America at odd hours? Why was she so fascinated with his private ledgers and accounts? Why did she keep asking about the ownership of assets scattered across Europe and Asia? Claire tried to mask her unease, but the weight of his suspicions bore down on her. She knew the line between charm and exposure was razor thin, and Hassan was no ordinary man to deceive. Hassan's voice carried no open accusation, yet every word suggested that he already knew the truth. For decades, he had dealt with rivals, traitors, and those who sought to strip him of his power. He had seen ambition masquerade as loyalty before, and he recognized the signs in Claire. What he didn't realize was that Claire was not acting alone. Her charm had been calculated, her presence carefully orchestrated with the help of accomplices, who had identified Hassan as a prime target. He was old, wealthy, and known for surrounding himself with fleeting companions. To Claire's partners back home, he was the perfect mark, and she was the perfect weapon to bring him down. As Hassan tightened his verbal net, Claire's thoughts raced. She couldn't let him corner her. The plan she had carried in fragments for weeks could not be delayed any longer. She had prepared for contingencies, packing something small and undetectable before boarding the jet. In her clutch was a vial, colorless and nearly odorless, obtained through connections abroad. It was meant to appear as nothing more than an expensive perfume sample if discovered, but Claire knew its real purpose. At the right moment, dissolved into a drink, it would silence Hassan and remove the obstacle standing between her and the wealth she coveted. She played her role carefully, feigning offense at his probing, offering reassurances, layered with false warmth. Then, with steady hands, she poured drinks into crystal glasses. Hassan watched her intently, but made no move to stop her. Claire's smile was controlled, her voice soft, her manner attentive. It was in that moment of apparent intimacy that she slipped the vial into his glass, a move practiced and perfected in her mind long before the trip. The liquid blended seamlessly with the rich amber of the whiskey, invisible to the eye and undetectable to the tongue. Hassan lifted the glass, holding her gaze as he drank. Claire's heart thudded, each beat a countdown. Minutes passed and at first, nothing happened. Then, as the cabin lights glowed dimly against the backdrop of the night sky, Hassan's composure began to falter. His face tightened, his breathing grew uneven, and his hand trembled slightly as he reached for the armrest. He tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat, words dissolving into a rasp. Claire leaned forward with a practiced look of alarm, pretending to be the concerned lover, calling out for the crew to assist. The cabin erupted in confusion. The pilot was alerted, and security staff rushed from their quarters, but nothing could be done at 30,000 feet. Hassan collapsed against the seat, his powerful frame suddenly frail, his face drained of its authority. The crew attempted to revive him, scrambling with first aid kits, but the effort was futile. Claire clutched his arm, tears streaking her face, though her sorrow was staged, her mind already calculating her next move. The pilot diverted the jet to the nearest emergency landing site, declaring a medical crisis. To everyone else on board, it looked like a tragic accident, the sudden collapse of an aging man, whose body could no longer endure. Only Claire knew the truth, that the empire of Hassan al-Zafir had ended not from the natural erosion of age, but from the poison she had slipped into his drink. She played her role to perfection, grieving in public while inside she felt the first taste of triumph. What she had not considered, however, was how thoroughly Hassan's world was watched, how carefully his every step was monitored, and how little space there was in his empire for secrets to remain hidden. The private jet touched down under the cover of night, its engines humming with urgency as emergency services waited on the runway. Paramedics rushed on board, but by the time they reached Hassan al-Zafir, it was already too late. His body was lifeless, his once commanding presence reduced to silence. Claire sat beside him, her face a mask of despair. She clutched a handkerchief, wiping at tears that seemed endless, her performance convincing enough to fool those who saw her in that moment. To the crew and to the first responders, it looked like a tragedy born of age and frailty, the natural end to the life of a 70-year-old magnate. Yet beneath the veneer of grief, Claire's mind was steady, already rehearsing the story she would tell. Her account was simple. Hassan had been laughing, sipping his drink, when suddenly his body gave way. She had tried to comfort him, but the collapse was too sudden. She painted herself as the helpless partner, the woman who had loved him for his spirit rather than his wealth. At first, authorities treated the case as a natural death, but in Dubai, where wealth and power intersected with politics and suspicion, nothing was ever left unquestioned. Detective Omar Rahmani, a seasoned investigator known for his precision, was assigned to oversee the matter. He was not easily swayed by appearances, and Claire's beauty and grief did little to distract him from his instincts. The first fracture in her story appeared quickly. Hassan's personal assistant, Farid Karim, gave a statement that contradicted Claire's version of events. He noted that Hassan had been in excellent health, undergoing regular checkups, and showing no signs of weakness in recent months. Farid emphasized that his employer had become increasingly suspicious of Claire, often discussing her strange curiosity about his accounts and assets. His testimony suggested motive, though not yet evidence. Omar listened carefully, noting every detail, his suspicion growing that Hassan's death was no accident. Laila Kasari soon stepped into the storm, her grief overshadowed by anger. She presented files she had been compiling through private investigators, photographs of Claire meeting discreetly with strangers in hotel lobbies, records of long-distance calls to the United States, and screenshots of encrypted messages exchanged late at night. Though none of it directly proved murder, it painted a picture of a woman involved in something far larger than a romance. Claire had not just been a fleeting companion, she had been playing a dangerous game with her father's fortune as the prize. Autopsy results delivered the breakthrough. Toxicology reports revealed traces of a foreign substance in Hassan's system, a poison that could mimic symptoms of a heart attack but left microscopic evidence in the bloodstream. The discovery shattered Claire's story of natural death. Authorities questioned her again, pressing her about the events on the jet. She stuck to her role, denying everything, insisting she had only loved Hassan and would never harm him. Yet her answers grew tangled, and the cracks widened with each round of questioning. Omar Rahmani widened the investigation,
tracing Claire's contacts abroad. What emerged was a network of individuals linked to financial scams and fraud operations, many of whom had vanished after failed schemes. Claire was connected to them by phone records and encrypted transfers, links she could not explain away. It became clear that she was no innocent tourist swept into romance, but a calculated infiltrator, whose assignment had ended in blood. Her arrest came swiftly. One moment she was in a luxury suite prepared for her as Hassan's grieving partner. The next she was in handcuffs, her name splashed across international headlines. The story of the American tourist and the Dubai oil magnate spread like wildfire, shocking both continents. Images of her stepping off the jet in despair were replayed alongside footage of her being led into custody. The transformation from glamorous companion to accused murderer was complete. In court, the prosecution laid out the evidence in chilling detail. Farid's testimony, Layla's files, the autopsy results, and the digital trail all painted an undeniable picture. Claire sat silent through most of it, her once radiant face pale under the courtroom lights. Whatever charm she had once wielded held no power. The world saw not the grieving partner, but the architect of Hassan's downfall. The verdict was inevitable. Claire Montrose was found guilty, her carefully crafted persona stripped away to reveal the predator beneath. She had sought wealth and escape, but instead found herself trapped in the very world she thought she had conquered. The story of Hassan al-Zafir's final flight became more than a tale of romance gone wrong. It became a cautionary saga of greed, betrayal, and the dangerous allure of power. The private jet, once a symbol of untouchable luxury, would forever be remembered as the stage where a dark crime unfolded, leaving behind a legacy of scandal that neither Dubai nor the world would forget.